Process KPIs are arguably the most important element in the entire process-based management world. That's a big call, but I think it can be easily supported because the purpose of process-based management is to optimize organizational performance. We do good process management so that we can do good process improvement. We can't deliver the best process improvements unless we first choose the best processes to improve. All of that requires good measurement. Good measurement means measurement of the right things in the right way. It's fundamental then that we make sure we choose the right process KPIs. In this video, I want to suggest some insights into how we can define the best KPIs for the measurement and management of a process. And that's not always easy to do. And if you're just starting out, can feel quite daunting and challenging because there's lots of people, there's lots of ideas. It's a little difficult to understand perhaps what a process is meant to achieve. So we need to come up with some systemic way of doing that because there are a lot of processes that we're going to manage over time, and we want to be able to have a very efficient way of coming up with the KPIs and subsequently the targets. I want to just touch on 3 previous videos, just point you at them because they're videos, topics in which KPIs, process KPIs are fundamentally important. So we spoke about the Tregear circles in another video, and in that PO circle, the first node that we deal with there is called target, and that's about setting process KPIs and their targets. So that's fundamentally important. There in the circles, it's where it all starts. The 7 enablers enable the circles to turn, another video on this. And the second, up the top there, the second enabler is process measurement, and that's where we're defining process KPIs in enabler terms. And of course, the consequences of that, the measurement of performance, has a big impact in process governance and in process change. So again, process KPIs, fundamentally important here in the 7 enablers. And then the third video that you might like to check out is this one about the process performance framework. And it's all about how we're managing, firstly defining what good process performance would be, and then managing to that standard. So this is the active process management. Those bottom 2 layers in this diagram are about active process management. Just 6 questions there that we're applying to individual processes to firstly define what performance looks like, should look like, and then to analyse what it is looking like and to make changes as appropriate. So you might like to check those other videos. So here's the process performance question. And we ask this question all of the time when we're looking at process performance. If this process was working as well as its key stakeholders would like it to, what would it be doing and how would we know? Often there's quite a simple answer to that, but sometimes it's not quite so simple, or sometimes we've got differences of opinion, diametrically opposed opinions in the worst case from different stakeholders. But it's a wonderful conversation to have about a process. It really lets us come to grips with what it's all about. So if it was doing really well, what would be happening? What does really well mean? And how would we measure that? How would we know? What's the test for how well the process is performing? There's a bunch of things that are not good reasons for selecting a process KPI. And we're not going to pick it because it's easy or because we've already got a ton of data or it's something that never goes wrong. What's the point of measuring that? If it's something we've always done or we're currently doing, that doesn't make it wrong, but it doesn't make it right either. We need to challenge that. And we're certainly not going to pick a KPI because it's fuzzy enough to hide our mistakes. So, we want to have process KPIs that will unearth the truth. And we're looking for problems. We're looking for opportunities to improve, not opportunities to make excuses and to hide problems. We want to unearth those problems. That's what it's all about. So we won't be using any of these reasons to choose our KPIs. So how will we do it? Well, I think it has these 2 steps. This works for me. Maybe it will for you as well. I like first to create a long list, and that can be as long as you like without being silly about it. But the long list, everything we might measure about a process KPI. And we'll do this in consultation, obviously, with stakeholders. And then we're going to take that long list and we're going to refine it. We're going to apply all sorts of filters to it to make it the shortest possible list. Then we do need to have the shortest possible list. So let's have a think about how we do that. So for the long list, as I say, we ask the stakeholders. If you could only do one thing on this list, it would be ask the stakeholders. They're the experts. They know about it. And the sorts of questions that are good to ask them are wiggle and wobble there as I summarise them. What would good look like? What would bad look like? And we want to have this conversation. It's not a matter of saying to a stakeholder, what's the KPI? I mean, they may not understand that language and you just want to talk it through with them. So, when this goes really well, what's happening? If it goes bad, what's happening? What does it mean? What's the impact? Because you want to get to the final impact of poor performance. To the extent that you can, depending on the process, you want to get there and look at it. You want to experience it. You want to be physically there. You want to be the customer or be the person processing, doing the work in the process. If you can do that, then that's good. That kind of experiential involvement, I think, will tell you a lot about the process. If we can identify failure points in a process or some set of circumstances that is possibly going to cause a problem, then maybe we've got a KPI that will give us some early warning about that kind of thing happening. There will be compliance and regulatory demands, things that we just have to do, and let's get those out of the way quickly because they should be reasonably straightforward. Just make sure we really do have to do it and not just a nice to have. Reference libraries can be useful. They can be sources of inspiration about the sorts of things that might be good to measure, particularly about cross-functional processes. As always, just be careful with a reference library. It's a list of someone else's KPIs, not yours necessarily. So just make sure that any KPI that you take off such a list actually applies to the process that you have in focus. And we might also think about different points of view. This is stakeholders, but maybe even beyond stakeholders. What are the points of view that might come into play? Because that might suggest another way of measuring. So, for example, an airline might say we've got, 95% on-time departure, and they might think that's great, and it's improved a lot over the last little while. But what about the impact on travellers in that other 5 percentage points where the flight was late leaving? Was it so late leaving that they missed another connection and then they missed some important family event or something like that? What were the consequences of that? So different points of view might be useful to prompt conversation about adding to the long list. And the long list can be as long as you like within reason, because then we're going to apply filters to that long list and come up with the critical few KPIs. We want this list, the short list, to be as short as possible. And what can we do for that? Well, we can eliminate redundancies. We certainly want to do that. We don't want to waste time measuring effectively the same thing more than once. For example, you probably don't need to measure customer satisfaction and repeat business. Be careful, talk to the marketing folks or whoever, get some good advice about that, because it may not be the same thing, but probably it is. So we want to eliminate redundancies, and then if we can identify errors, well, maybe we can eliminate the error. If there's something that always goes wrong, well, maybe we can stop it going wrong, and then we don't need that KPI. We don't want to get good at measuring something that goes wrong. We'd rather be good at not having it go wrong in the first place. And then test for importance. So here's something we might measure for sure about the process, but is it important enough to stay on the list? And to whom is it important? And why is it important? Let's really put it through its paces and say, let's prove that you should stay on the list. And here's an important one. Is the thing we're suggesting we measure something that's actually within the control of this process? Maybe what we're talking about is the consequence of something that happened in a previous process, and it's not something over which this process has control. Some policy, something else was set in another process, and now we're just seeing perhaps the symptom of that here, but not the cause. So it might still be a good thing to measure, but not here. We might need to measure something somewhere else. And then we need to make sure that we can actually collect the data. The measurement method is so important, isn't it? Because if we come up, and it's easy enough to do this, if we have a process, a KPI that is hard to measure, it's complicated, difficult, it's costly perhaps, it's unlikely to survive, in the longer term, isn't it? So we actually want to have things that are easy enough to measure, easy enough so that they'll be sustained. So we go through the long list and we create the short list and we make it as short as we possibly can. And then a couple of things to do after that. We need to do some kind of reality check. Have we got a good set of KPIs? Are they measuring the right things? What's the impact going to be when we make this disturbance in the performance measurement ecosystem? Are there any unintended consequences? Are there any adverse effects? What are the kinds of things that might happen? We might want to try and second guess that, and perhaps we can adjust the KPIs to deal with that, or at least we want to be watching carefully when we first start using those KPIs for any of those adverse effects or unintended consequences. Let's pull all that together. So discovering process KPIs is so important. It's fundamental to the whole process-based management idea. It's about performance, therefore it's got to be about measurement, and it's got to be about measurement of the performance of processes. That's what it's about. So the PKPI question is perhaps the most important question in the whole of process-based management. If this process was working as well as the key stakeholders wanted to, what would it be doing and how would we know? And when we're actively managing processes, we're asking that question so often. And then we do the long list and then we create the short list. And I think that's a nice way to do it. That involves lots of stakeholders, lots of feedback, very collaborative kind of effort. And then we get to the end, we get to a short list, and then let's just do a reality check. Have we actually got something here that's measuring what feels like the performance of the process? What's going to happen when we release this into the wild? We're going to disturb the performance ecosystem. What's likely to happen? We're looking for those kinds of adverse effects or unintended consequences. How can we deal with that? So it's so important, that we get the right process KPIs for the right processes, and then we'll later set the right targets for those process KPIs. Process-based management is about performance. It's about the performance aspects of selecting the right process for active management and then going on and doing the right process improvements to that correct process. And that gives us improved organizational performance, and that's the purpose of process-based management. Thanks for joining me for this Process Insight. I hope it's given you some ideas about how to be more systematic in defining the minimum viable set of process KPIs. We'd all love to hear about your experiences and insights if you're able to share. What else would you like me to discuss in future videos? Please leave a note below so I can make these videos as useful for everyone as possible. And thanks for sharing this time with me. If you'd like to continue the conversation, I'd love to hear from you.